I'm here to talk about my forthcoming paper at the Strategic Management Journal titled Why Resource-Based Theory's Model of Profit Appropriation Must Adopt a Stakeholder Perspective. Rather than just summarizing the article, which after all you can read, I thought I would take this opportunity to highlight its core arguments and discuss some of their implications in ways that are difficult to do in the paper that's published in SMJ. The central assertion of the paper is simple to state, yet I think is quite profound in its implications. That assertion is that those that provide firms access to resources that have the potential for generating economic profits will be reluctant to provide access to those resources unless they can share in some of the economic profits that access to those resources might generate. On its face, this is a pretty reasonable assertion. It only requires that those who make resources with profit-generating potential available to a firm are aware of at least some of this potential and that they are interested in appropriating at least some of these profits. Of course, these conditions may not hold in every setting. For example, sometimes a particular resource supplier may have absolutely almost no idea about the potential profits that could be generated by making a resource available to a firm. And sometimes suppliers might have interests besides appropriating the profits generated by their resources. Kaufman's colleagues, for example, found that the second exception is more likely in labor markets than it is in other kinds of factor markets. However, despite these exceptions, the idea that suppliers might have some sense of the profit-generating potential of the resources they're supplying to firms and might generally be interested in appropriating at least some of those profits don't seem like unreasonable assumptions. But this simple assertion turns out to turn much of the traditional approach to studying the firm upside down. For example, as long as shareholders are not the only source of profit-generating resources for a firm, firms will have multiple residual claimants. Since firms can write fixed claims contracts for non-profit-generating resources, contracts with those providing access to profit-generating resources will necessarily be incomplete. This means that the distribution of the profits generated by a firm will always be subject to ExPost bargaining among those who provide the profit-generating resources in the first place. This, in turn, implies that ExPost bargaining among stakeholders is an essential feature of the profit-generating process. It also suggests that these incomplete contracts with ExPost bargaining are consistent with the interests of a firm's shareholders, because it is usually the case that without access to the resources obtained in this manner, there are not economic profits to distribute to shareholders. In this sense, there may be conflicts between shareholders and certain other stakeholders, particularly stakeholders, those that provide access to profit-generating resources, about how much of a firm's profits each will receive, especially when the creation of profits requires co-specialized investments among the resources to which a firm has access. However, there is no conflict between shareholders and these special stakeholders regarding the need to have multiple residual claimants. For without multiple residual claimants, there will typically be no profits. Taken together, the paper suggests that managers looking to generate economic profits will typically need to gain access to highly specialized resources from multiple stakeholders and not just shareholders. Introducing such stakeholders into the discussion significantly complicates the analysis compared to the simple world where only shareholders are residual claimants. But in a world where shareholders are the only residual claimant, it is hard to explain where profits come from, except for a firm being lucky. I personally have been very reluctant to introduce stakeholder logic into the field of strategic management. However, the logic of this paper has compelled me to do so. Of course, the stakeholder logic developed in this paper differs in some important ways compared to at least some extant versions of stakeholder theory. So, for example, this stakeholder theory focuses mostly on those stakeholders who can provide access to resources that, when combined with other resources, can generate economic profits. This differs from at least some other stakeholder theories that emphasize a firm satisfying all those who are affected by its actions, something that has always sounded like an impossible task to me. But my interest in incorporating a type of stakeholder theory into strategic management is not simply a matter of theoretical logic. I have been struck by the number of firms that adopt a type of stakeholder logic in their daily operations. I'm not talking about firms who adopt mission statements that promise to satisfy all the interests of all their stakeholders, without specifying any way that can actually be done. I am talking about those that identify a few key non-shareholder stakeholders and combining them with other resources in a way that helps generate economic profits. For example, firms like FedEx and Southwest Airlines have long focused on creating organizational cultures that support employees and employee teamwork. This teamwork, when combined with a variety of other operational choices, seems to have created enormous economic profits for these firms. For these service firms, the notion of maximizing shareholders' wealth has necessarily implied emotionally engaging teams of employees in providing high-quality customer service. This has been true for some non-service firms as well, including, for example, a Toyota Motor Company and at least some of its suppliers, and Hewlett-Packard Corporation, at least during the 1980s. For years, I have thought of these firms engaging in enlightened and thoughtful management processes. I now understand that these processes are actually core to the ability of these firms to generate economic profits. Indeed, when these firms have been unable to maintain this commitment to one of its critical suppliers' employees, as perhaps happened in the corporate restructurings at HP in the 1990s and 2000, they seem to have also been unable to generate the same level of profitability. I know these are complicated stories with lots of factors, including changing industry structure and the emergence of globalization, government regulations, and so forth. And they all have an impact on these firms' performance. But at the core, the inability of these firms to enroll their employees or other suppliers or even some of their customers to make specific investments in ways that could generate economic profits underlies the lower level of profits for these firms. All this suggests another implication of the central assertion of this paper concerning the role of at least some managers and entrepreneurs in a firm. That implication is that at least some managers / entrepreneurs in a firm must conceive of a theory of how combining access to co-specialized resources from a variety of sources can generate profits, and must be able to implement this theory by creating a setting where those providing access to those resources are willing to make those co-specialized investments. In doing so, these managers and entrepreneurs are likely to become themselves residual claimants for the profits that a firm generates. Put differently, in order for a firm to generate economic profit, not only must shareholders be residual claimants, but typically at least some employees will also be those residual claimants. Those employees, managers or entrepreneurs who conceive of and implement a strategy that is required to build a co-specialized bundle of resources to generate economic profits. Thank you.